This will be recorded, and people who have registered for this will get a link. This will be put up on the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation's YouTube channel as soon as Ken Ross, Elizabeth's son, is able to do that for us. And you will be getting an email from Eventbrite about that with the links, and also some links to resources that Katie will be talking about today. So I want to welcome you all and thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Susan Barber, and I am the curator for the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Community Education Program, which is currently in the US, and I am an English speaker, so this will be in English, our programming. I apologize that I have never spent enough time to become proficient in other languages. And because our foundation currently is run really on donations, we are not in a position, as we offer this programming as much as possible at no cost to attendees, we're just not in a position to be able to pay interpreters right now. So I thank you all for your understanding about that and your patience. And for those of you, I'd invite you to, in the chat, maybe just in the chat, where you're zooming in from. It's always astonishing to me that people are zooming in from across the US, usually Canada, some Central and South American countries, and often people in Europe and the Mideast. So this is a very global experience, these conversations. Elizabeth
Oh,
Copeland, you're
Elisabeth. Hi,
wonderful.
Elisabeth.
You're in Costa Rica. Lucky you. Beautiful. Thank you all. That's beautiful. It's so nice to see you all. Burlingame. I used to work over in Redondo. Wow. This is one of my favorite parts of these conversations. In
Oh,
Argentina,
Buenos
thank you
Aires.
so
Wow.
much. I am in lovely Alameda, California, today and most days. And Katie will introduce herself. She's up in beautiful, beautiful Washington State. So what we're going to do this morning is I'm going to give a very brief introduction to the foundation and a very brief introduction to Barbara, yay, to Katie. And then I'm going to turn this over to Katie to give an introduction. She's going to be speaking today about her beautiful book, Uplifting, and she's going to talk in more detail about that. There'll be a couple of questions initially that I will ask Katie, a little bit of a conversation, and then we're going to turn this over to Katie. And we'll have the last 30 minutes for Q&A for people. And for those of you who are brave and can raise your hand, there is at the bottom of everybody's screen in Zoom, one way or another, either a reactions tab or a hand raising, and then I'll be able to see who's here and who will be raising their hand for questions that they'd like to ask in person. But throughout the chat, I'll be monitoring, throughout the presentation, I'll be monitoring the chat. So feel free to put questions up there if you are not a brave person that wants to be on camera to ask your questions. So without too much further ado, I am going to just briefly introduce the foundation and the beautiful work that the foundation has been doing. For those of you that are familiar with Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, she's often known as the death and dying lady, and the reality for Elisabeth is she lived her life in a way that I've met so few people live their life. She was the life and living lady who spent a lot of time coming to understand that death is part of our life, and creating opportunities for people who were ill and people who were dying to have opportunities to talk about what that part of their life looked like, to write about that extensively and to support people. And that work has continued long after Elisabeth's death. It's carried on by her son, Ken Ross, and a group of people around the country and the world who have worked with Elisabeth in some capacity or the other, or like me, who only met Elisabeth twice, but whose work inspired me from the time I was 11 and stole her book when I was volunteering at the Bayville Public Library and read it at home under the covers as an 11-year-old, and then quickly returned it. And like many people, pretended death didn't exist until I was almost 30 years old and my friends started dying of AIDS. And then death became probably the greatest teacher in my life. So the foundation is a 501c3. It's a nonprofit organization inspired by Elisabeth's life. Elisabeth was a psychiatrist, a humanitarian, and one of the pioneers of hospice as we know it. Elisabeth often referred to herself as a life and living lady, and boy, did she live her life. It's in spirit of embracing all of life, which includes death, that we further the mission and the vision of Elisabeth through the work of the foundation. And essential to this work was her deeply held belief that unconditional love is the most healing medicine of all. And it's in that spirit that we offer this class and all of our events. The foundation currently works internationally and has chapters around the world, with hospital work in Singapore, educating physicians and palliative care workers through very small countries that don't have really healthcare infrastructures, East Timor, Nepal. Ken travels all over the world. There's an 18-bed respite center now in Guatemala for cancer patients, and they provide incredible services to people throughout Guatemala, including food supplies to many villages that otherwise would go hungry. Chile, France, Japan, programming with Stanford, and working to start the Green Burial movement in Mexico are just some of the few things that the foundation is supporting. So thank you all, and please know that your donations, for those of you that are in a position to do that, have been able to support our programming. And now I'd just like to briefly introduce Dr. Katie Eastman, who will talk a little bit about her relationship with Elisabeth. She's a licensed psychotherapist, social worker, and life coach with over 35 years of experience specializing in loss and transition. Her work is profoundly influenced by her mentor, Dr. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, a pioneer in the field of grief and bereavement. Dr. Eastman was deeply affected by Elisabeth's work throughout her career. Through her writing and practice, she continues to honor Elisabeth's legacy, guiding individuals to find meaning and growth in the face of adversity. And that is what we'll be talking about today. I'm going to ask just a question. Katie, first let me bring you down here to spotlight you here. I'm kind of curious, number one, if you would just introduce yourself a little bit more than that, but I'm so curious to know about your life before meeting Elisabeth and your life after meeting Elisabeth. And if you might just say a little bit about that, that would be, I think, a very interesting place to start this conversation.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I recognize some of your faces and your names, and I am thrilled to be here. This is one of my absolute favorite topics to talk about, transforming loss into growth. And Elisabeth was someone who touched my life at the age of 24 years old. I had been taken by my mentor to a retreat in Maine where I met the wonderful Elisabeth Kübler-Ross. I had read her book and I really didn't know why I was there until I went. But it was one of her workshops, and as many of you know, people came up front, and Elisabeth would talk to them about their losses, and they would beat a mattress and share their experiences. And I went up as a 24-year-old, and for those of you who remember what you're like when you're 24, you usually think you know everything, but you really know very little. So I got up front and I made the huge mistake of trying to conjure up some grief, but I didn't really know what I was doing. And I looked at Elisabeth Kübler-Ross and I said, I really don't have any issues. And you can imagine what she did. She stuck her tongue out at me and she went, and she said, phony baloney, girl, you have plenty. And I remember that was a pivotal moment in my life because prior to that, I thought I knew a lot. And I really didn't, because in that moment, I realized I had a lot of growing up to do, and there was wisdom that I was missing. And so I made a choice, and I believe it was an uplifting choice. I chose to lift myself up and say, I'm going to take this experience, I'm going to learn from it, I'm going to change from it, and I'm going to grow from it. And I'm going to learn from this lady because she clearly has wisdom. And it was that choice that really changed my life because I became such a follower of her work. My book says that it is inspirited by Elisabeth Kübler-Ross because it is. And inspirited means encouraged. And she was my encourager all through my life, all through my work, and still is. And she is the guiding light behind my work. So how I transformed, I learned. I learned to listen. That's what I learned from Elisabeth Kübler-Ross in that moment.
Thank you, Katie. That's Yeah, I was, as I said earlier, I had stolen her book at 11 from the public library. My job was to Dewey Decimal those books and put them up on the shelf. But the librarians were in a meeting, and when I opened up the box and saw On Death and Dying, I just grabbed it and put it in my bag, which I recognized as stealing as soon as it was happening. But going home and reading that book as an 11-year-old, I finished it, and I remember this is one of the most like crystal clear memories of my life is thinking, well, thank goodness there's somebody out there in the world that knows what's really going on. And immediately also recognizing you are 11 years old and you have no idea what's going on in the world. But I had such comfort. I felt such comfort knowing that the sense that there was somebody out there that saw more than just saw the world through a different lens than the lens that 11-year-old me saw. And when I met Elisabeth years later, what I was just so struck with was number one, her like ability to just cut through all the BS and get to the heart of the matter, and the kindness that she exhibited, and that she was just not one of those like what I would consider sort of the earth mom, like touchy feel. Like she just was a part of the
Mm-mm.
matter. This is what's important. This is like how we can manage through some extraordinarily difficult times. And one of those extraordinarily difficult times was an interaction she had with a friend of mine dying of AIDS dementia, who was one of the most sophisticated and beautiful men I'd ever met. And she just went to him immediately and broke through all of also like what you're saying, when she stuck her tongue out at you, like sort of that challenge with Bill, the same challenge. And he rose to the occasion. It was just one of the most beautiful experiences. And then we went to see her at her house, and that was just a wonderful afternoon and completely not anything that I would have expected an afternoon with Elisabeth Kübler-Ross to be about. So I'm curious, like we had this conversation just a few minutes earlier. The title of your book, I know like one of my earlier experiences with grief, if somebody had said this is going to be, this has the potential to be an uplifting and inspiring experience when I was sort of in the dregs of like feeling I had just been swept away in a tidal wave of emotion and grief. Um, I lived through that experience long enough to understand that, oh, indeed, it can be. Um, and it sort of hinges on this ability for people to make choices, even understanding that they can make choices in these very difficult and often dark times. And I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that. Um, yeah.
Sure. When I speak of uplifting, I speak in terms of our choices with all kinds of losses. Every day we face loss. We face changes that bring about loss. We have tangible losses, we have intangible losses. We have small losses, we have great losses. And we have choice of how we address those losses. And everyone in this book made a choice of addressing loss as an opportunity to grieve, to learn, to change, to identify what was most important in their lives, and to give back. And those were conscious choices, but in some cases, not even conscious. But subconsciously, they did things that rippled compassion. And I watched these different people in these different scenarios. Their stories are all in the book, and they lifted me up. And what I recognized, and in the book, I talk about my own loss from infertility, my own loss of self-esteem, my own struggles with growing up, many losses that we all have incurred, or many of us have incurred, and how I learned to lift myself up and lift up others. But it doesn't mean that you don't have those dark times. Actually, it's the opposite. It's in those difficult, most strenuous, most awful moments that you make a choice that says, I will learn from this. I will grow from this. I'm here now and I will take this and I will make it count. And I really do believe that's what Elisabeth was about. She was about lifting us up because she encouraged us to be with our grief long enough to allow us to learn what was most important to move forward through our lives consciously with conscious choices. So I believe that's how we honor the people or the things we've lost through that conscious choice to make a difference from what we do.
Thank you so much, Katie. That just resonates so much for me with my experience of just the enormous losses at 30 when I finally had to turn around and face death after spending that 20 years after reading Elizabeth's on Death and Dying, just continuing like we were raised to pretend that death does not exist, or like death happens to other people. We read about it, people we knew died, my grandparents died, but this idea that death is going to come close to me, it was something like my family, we kept at arm's length and staved off as long as we possibly could. In my father's case, up to his almost last breath at 67 years old, just like dying for 8 months of leukemia, but also just pretending that that was not happening at all. And so when death comes close, I think that's the grief that most of us, like, that's what gets our attention. That's when we pay attention most to grief. But these smaller losses, well, or maybe not smaller losses. I'm thinking, people who have lost jobs, whose marriages, have changed in ways that they could not have predicted, whose children, their relationships with their children, these smaller losses. I don't know if they're actually, I'm not measuring these losses, that's not the right word to use, but these losses that we often don't feel like we have permission to grieve because these terrible things are happening in the world, and my dog dies, and then you're incredible grief, but also feeling like you shouldn't be doing that, like other people it's much worse for. And I think these kinds of stories that can point us to how do we take these experiences and make meaning from them. For me, I think a lot of the work I've done since those initial deaths when I was in my 30s, it has been in great measure as a way to honor the legacies that my friends did not get a chance to consciously leave. Like, they died in their 30s or 40s, and that was a completely unexpected thing that they often were too sick to prepare for. So this legacy making and meaning making, I wonder if you could talk a little just about that and how this idea kind of translates into those areas.
Sure. One of the reasons I wrote this book is because I encountered the first story in the book is a young man named Jason, who was 17 years old. He was diagnosed with cancer at 15. He had dreams, hopes, and visions and skill to become a professional football player. And he lived in a state where that was possible. And here he had cancer. He had Ewing sarcoma. And when I met him, he had just found out that he had a reoccurrence and he would die within a few weeks. And I was his social worker. And long story short, he became my teacher. One day, as I have to say again, a young 20-something social worker who thought she knew everything from the school books, he encountered me one day and he said, "Your death questions really get on my nerves." And what happened in that moment is I shifted and I said, "Teach me." I listened. I heard him, and he became my teacher. And before he died, I promised him I would dedicate my life's work to him and tell his story, because he was one of those people who made an uplifting, conscious choice. He said, "If I have cancer and I'm going to die, then I am going to make the most of it. I am going to choose to learn life lessons. I'm going to pass those on. I am going to live until I die, and I'm going to be an example to everyone I come across." And that's exactly what he did. And his story is in the very beginning of the book, because he was my greatest of all teachers, other than Elisabeth. And he was the one that taught me to live until I died, as well as Elisabeth. And there's a wonderful quote I want to read to everyone, because there's a story about Jason that goes with this quote. And the book starts with a quote from Austin. He was 8 years old and he was dying of cancer. And his mother was there and he said, "Mom, I have something to tell you and I want you to tell the whole world." And she said, "Well, what's up?" And he said, "There is love inside all of us and around all of us. The entire world is loving you. There are angels everywhere. They are the same on earth as in heaven. And the purpose of life is to make a difference. And she said, Austin, how did you know that? And I didn't. She said, oh, he said, oh, you knew it, Mom, when you were little, but you forgot it when you grew up. So flip forward 30 years later, after Austin said that, and the Jason program, the Pediatric Hospice and Palliative Care program I started in memory of Jason, Austin said that. And then Oprah got on the phone at one point with Jason and had said the same thing, that the purpose of life is to make a difference. So that thread runs through every aspect of what I do, that every day we have an opportunity to make a difference for someone else from our experiences, from our losses. We can learn those lessons and pass them on. And that helps us heal. It gives us the ability to just not just lift ourselves up, but to lift someone else up. Well, that's why I wrote this book, because these people in their stories lifted me to make me a better me. I grew from them. And then I said, they deserve to have their stories told. So like I promised Jason, I will tell those stories. And I'm hoping, and my vision is that by reading this book, you will be lifted up in whatever way you need to be, because these stories have different messages all the way through them. There are messages from someone as young as a premature baby all the way to an 83-year-old. So I encourage you, when you read the book, to find your own messages. They will come through. They will definitely come through. So I'm going to turn my slides on, if that's okay.
That's great. I'm going to leave this spotlight here and feel free. Thank you, Katie. It's a
All
beautiful
right.
into this.
Which one is it? Hoping it's this one. Okay. There we go. All right. So this is the book, and this is what it means to be uplifted. It gives you the tools and it offers examples of how to lift yourself up from everyday losses. And I don't mean these losses are small or large in the sense of not as impactful, because they are impactful. But what differentiates them is some of them are concrete and some of them are not. Some of them are very difficult to recognize in us. Sometimes it's a loss of confidence, a loss of security, a loss of sense of safety, a loss of self-esteem, a loss of any kind of impact, experiential loss that we engage in every single day when we go through a change that alters our world. So I want you all to start by asking yourself, when was a time that you experienced a life-altering change where it rocked your world? Just think about that for a moment. Now I want you to ask yourself, when you went through this, did you think about how you wanted to grieve? How did you want to manage this loss and this grief? Or did you simply allow it to manage you? Both are equally okay. There's no right or wrong here. Like our great inspiration, I am absolutely a proponent that there is no right way to do grief. There is no linear phases of grief, that we all go through it in our own way. However, I want us to think about the fact that we do have choice points where we can choose, do I want to learn from this experience? What is most important that I want to take with me from this experience? And as Susan said, Elisabeth didn't want to be known as the lost lady or the death lady. She wanted to be known as the life and living lady. And the way that we live our lives to its fullest is if we allow these losses to inform us about what we want and need and how we want to be better versions of ourselves. Jason did that. He made a conscious choice and he lived every second of his life all the way to the end, living his life to the fullest, consciously, even though he had those non-concrete losses. He lost his ability to feel his identity. He lost his identity. He was 17 years old. He was a 17-year-old cancer patient talking to adults. He lost his innocence. He lost his ability to be a student. He lost his childhood. He lost a lot of things that were not concrete, but they affected him every day of his life. And what did he do? He faced every single one of them consciously. He talked about them. He became an inspirational speaker. He called me his agent because I set him up with all of these different groups where he could make a difference. He lived 19 years more than some people live in 80 because of his conscious choice to be uplifting. So one of the reasons that I believe people make these conscious choices or not is a lot of times we have a loss, whether it's a tangible loss or an intangible loss, and we neglect to take the time to pause and ask ourselves the question, what do I need? And one of the things that Elisabeth taught me is the unconditional loving of yourself and others begins with the question, do you know you're loved? Do you know you're lovable? If not, start there, because your loss is an opportunity for you to magnify that in your life and in the life of someone else. So the three pillars of this book are rising to the challenge of change through loss, change, and growth. My mission is to educate and inspire you, individuals, organizations, teams, everywhere. I wake up every morning and I ask, okay, I want to touch 1 million lives. Let's start today. How many can I touch? And that is how I have risen from change. Last year, I was on my deathbed with a pulmonary embolism. And I remember so clearly lying in bed with my oxygen, and I knew that I could die any moment, and saying, I want the people I know to know how much I love them. And if they don't, if I get through this, I'm going to go through the rest of my life saying, I love you, I love you, I love you. And I have been doing that ever since. And I had emergency surgery. For whatever reason, I was able to live. And I'm here to say, tell the people you love them. That's one of the messages of uplifting. So what do we mean by loss, change, and growth? Well, we all know that change is something that happens every day. And this is where I began to learn about change. Is Elisabeth was very clear that we go through these emotions, these expressions of loss when we go through change. Sometimes shock, sometimes we are trying to integrate decisions. There's a trajectory that we go through. Again, not linear. But when you have gone through a change, have you ever felt like, oh, this can't be happening? Or, oh, my goodness, no, this didn't happen. Or this is just so hard. I'm so frustrated. I can't stand this anymore. Or so depressed and such strong longing that you just don't want to get out of bed. Elisabeth saw all of these phases that we go through with change, not just loss, but change. And so I started to realize from her work that, you know what, there's loss with change. And that brings opportunities for growth. So what do I mean by growth? Growth is the transformation that occurs when we face challenges with courage and intent. Growth is the process of evolving into a more loving and purposeful version of ourselves. So it's saying, I'm loved, I'm lovable, I'm going to love others, I'm going to lift up others, I am going to learn what it takes to live a purposeful life. I'm going to, as Austin said, make a difference. That's what Jason taught me. And one of the things that happens oftentimes with all of us with change and loss is fear. We are afraid. We become overwhelmed. We become paralyzed. And I remember so clearly Jason's words. It's not courage, it's have to. Those were his words when he was given the diagnosis of a life-ending illness. It's not courage, it's have to. So for all of us, whenever we face any kind of change, any kind of loss, it's that courage that comes from within us. It's our resilience. I call our spiritual muscles that help us rise up slowly. Sometimes that means just getting out of bed to make a difference in our lives, in the lives of those we love. That's why I wrote this book. I believe that loss is your superpower. So I came up with this process, which I call my recreate process of loss, change, and growth. And this arose from writing these stories and also from through COVID as a therapist and a life coach and a master grief coach, watching people go through the most unimaginable hell, rise from it, learn from it, and give back. And so I came up with this wheel of choices that we make. First, we retreat. We step back, we pause, and we make a choice. This is what I want to do. I want to make a choice to learn and grow. That's the first. The rest come all the way through at different phases. You evaluate, you turn towards change, you accept different aspects of change, you explore different ideas that you want to make changes out of. I have in the book prompts, questions that ask you what you want to know. What do you need to know about yourself? So many people don't know what they need or how to recreate themselves. That's what this is all about, is an opportunity for you to learn by asking yourself these prompting questions. And I actually created cards for this as well that you can get on my website, because I do believe a lot of us don't know what questions to ask ourselves if we want to make changes for the better. If we want to recreate ourselves, which we do all the way through our lives with any opportunity to change, how do we do it? Well, we need to start by asking ourselves those questions that will help us make those changes. In my book, I talk about my own recreations throughout my life, from childhood, from being a bullied child. I give great detail about the day that I was bullied all the way home, having rocks thrown at me. I talk about being made fun of because I was a heavy child. I talk about my infertility and how I was literally lying on the floor one day. I was bleeding, I was hurting, I was in such pain, in agony, and I yelled out, "Help me." And a perfect stranger came running and helped me. And it was in that moment, lying on the floor, I had to choose. Am I going to get up? Am I going to yell out? Am I going to ask for help? That was an uplifting moment when I chose to care about myself enough to cry out and say, please help me. And I helped, not only did I get help, but I learned so much about my own spiritual muscles from that. And I talk through the book about my own infertility. I talk about different ways that people put me down, tried to keep me small, tried to tell me I wasn't worthy. And I lifted myself up in each one of those occasions, and it made me stronger. Why? Because I made that choice. I made that uplifting choice. And then the beautiful book ends with the gorgeous, beautiful daughter I have that I adopted, and she is my hope. And all the way through my infertility process, I realized that I was able to give back to mothers of dying children from that pain. I had transformed my pain into purpose. I had lifted myself and others. I actually have lived an uplifting life. There's another example in this book of someone who lived an uplifting life. And he was a teenager. He was a homeless teenager. He found himself homeless. And he came into therapy with me. And every week he came faithfully. He lived in a shelter. He had to take the bus to get to me, but he did. For 2 years, he showed up every week. And what did he become? He became a college student. He went to college. He lifted himself up from abject poverty, from being completely isolated and alone. He got help, and he chose to do something to help others. He chose to become a physical therapist because he wanted to help others lift themselves up. He wanted to help others who were struggling. And he is a physical therapist. And how did he do that? I believe nothing other than lifting through his spiritual muscles, lifting himself up. And he got help. So I want to ask all of you to think again about that event that you talked about, that you thought about earlier. I want you to ask yourselves, did you make a conscious choice? Has anything I have said resonated with you about how you might have done it differently? Have you recreated yourself from this event or from this change? Do you want to recreate yourself? In what areas? Are you interested in becoming a better, more compassionate version of yourself? Do you want to follow Jason's example? Do you want to follow Austin's example? Well, I'm going to leave you with one of my stories. I'm not going to leave you, but I'm going to tell you one of my most favorite stories in this book about a pivotal moment for me, another pivotal moment where I was in the desert of the Wind River Mountains in Wyoming on a 250-mile trail ride. We were herding horses. I was experiencing the physical effects of my last pregnancy loss. I didn't know at the time it was my last, but it was my last. So I was riding to try and feel stronger. And we got lost. We ran into a stallion and a group of wild mustangs. And it was the end of the day. And we were not only lost, but we were lost in the middle of the mountains, no idea where we were, and the sun was going down. So you can only imagine how frightening that was. Half of us stayed behind at a watering hole and waited for help. The other half, myself included, watered our horses, got on our horses and said, we're going to find camp. My horse was the last to water. Her name was M&M, and she was a little pinto. And we set off, and she started to slow down. And I was screaming, trying to keep up with the rest of the group. They didn't hear me. The sun was going down. The more the sun went down, the more M&M slowed to a perfect stop. So I found myself completely in the dark, in the middle of the mountains. I knew absolutely nowhere. I had no idea where I was, completely isolated and alone. So what did I do? Well, of course, I cried. Then I prayed. Then I listened. And the voice that came was very clear. Let go of the reins. Letting go of the reins was not just metaphorical for me. I had trained without reins. And for any of you who know horses, riding without reins requires that you have very, very, very strong legs. So that's what I did. I wrapped the reins around the horn of the saddle. I tightened my legs. I gave her a kick and I said, okay, Eminem, it's up to you. And she took off at 180 degrees in the other direction. And I rode in the dark for 20 minutes. And finally, we met up with the rest of the group. That was a life-changing experience. That was a recreation. I was completely overwhelmed. I was in the dark. I didn't know what direction I was going to go in. I had lost my whole community, the people that I was riding with. I was completely alone. I went on to write my dissertation, this story as part of my dissertation, because it really illustrates that choice, the choice I made to listen to the message that came to me in stillness. That was an uplifting moment. So what I want all of you to think about is in every loss, in every change, in every experience where you feel like you want something to be different than it is, listen, pause, ask yourself the question, where's the love? Where's the light? How can I lift myself up? And what can I learn that can lift someone else up? Those are the most important messages of this book. And I encourage all of you to please get the book, read it, and if some stories will resonate more, great. But those stories contain people who lifted themselves up. A mom whose daughter completed suicide at age 15, whose life was completely shattered, but she made a conscious choice to come into therapy right away, and she was going to give back. From square one, she said, this has happened to me. I'm going to make it count. She said exactly what Jason said. So even when we're shattered, when we're lying on the floor, when we're bleeding, when we're in the middle of the darkness, we can listen to a hopeful message that may come. With that, I'm going to open to all of you to ask me as many questions as you'd like to.
Katie, thank you so much. I was listening to these stories. It just, and Pamela, we posted about her life's work coming as a result, or maybe not a result, but certainly being impacted by the deaths of both of her parents. It's still, I don't know why. I'm so grateful I still have this sort of ability to be astonished at things, but how these losses just can point us to directions that we would never have considered prior to them. If somebody had mentioned to me, I tell people fairly regularly that I was not on this line to be working in these spaces. So it's not the line I was on, and career day at high school, that is for sure. And yet without these losses and these deaths, this just would not have been the path. And so I just so appreciate the stories, and I appreciate also you pointing to how impactful just deep listening can be, and listening to ourselves. How often, like, we are trained in some ways to not listen to ourselves, that our voices are not important, or are, that quality of deep listening to what we need or what we can offer, just, our sort of, well, that's not really important. So I so appreciate that conversation and those pointing us to that. I also just want to ask people if there's a couple of people have posted some things in the chat, and I'm just curious for those of you that might like to raise your hand. I think for Zoom at the last little there's a couple of dots at the on my screen on the very far right. And if you click on that, you can see raise hand there. If people do that, that is just the easiest way for me to be able to track the order in which people would like to ask a question. And, I think also just not questions and just to share if people have experiences around this. Yeah, there's an excellent question, Katie. What if deep listening only returns silence?
And you wait, because there is something that will come. It may not come when you want it to, but it will come. In my case, the letting go of the reins came to me right away, thank God, and not a snake. um, that was something I was most grateful for. But sometimes it's not the right time for us to hear something because we aren't going to hear it yet. My book took me 10 years to write. And why? Because I wasn't ready to tell these stories in the way that they needed to be told. I needed to go through COVID. I needed to be a therapist watching people go through this experience to identify what this book was meant to be. And so sometimes silence is telling you it's not the right time. Wait.
Thank you, Katie. That seems so in contrast to what the sort of the way most sort of people in the Western world live our lives, which is just sort of this forward propelled momentum of getting things done and doing things now.
And we miss so many messages along the way when we live like that. We
Yes.
absolutely do. And just the whole message of are you loved and lovable, and do the people you love know that? Ask them if they know that. You'd be surprised. I actually presented this to a group the other day, and they really were totally blown away by that question. And they were going to go home and ask their family, because when they asked themselves, they were surprised at the answer.
Yes, thank you. We talked about this. Yeah, here's a question here. How does grief, loss, and peace tie into everything? Yes, thank you, Elisabeth. This is something that Katie and I had sort of pointed to earlier. And I just want to acknowledge that regardless of people's deeply held political beliefs, in right this moment, I think that this question is broad enough that I think everybody, at least in the United States, currently is being impacted by like waves of grief and experiences of loss. And this isn't about like sides or one side or the other, or one belief or another. I think that this broad question is, how can this type of work help sustain people in times like these where things seem so, our ideas of how life was going to be here, like just all of it just seems like sort of almost like a tsunami wave, just of emotion and concern.
So thank you, Elisabeth, for asking this. Elizabeth Hamilton Garino and I are writing a book called The Peace Handbook. Peace Guidebook, I'm sorry, Peace Guidebook. And what it is practical tools for maintaining peace in your life. So really, peace is the same in many ways as a living and uplifting life, because we are most at peace when we are aligned with our values and our actions. And so when we are making choices on a daily basis to respond or react to any experience that is causing us to feel triggered with a sense of fear or loss. And when we're triggered with fears or loss, Elisabeth Kübler-Ross used to say, if you react to something for more than 15 seconds, it is nothing to do with what's going on right now. It's an old wound that's being reenacted and triggered. So part of peace and living a peaceful life is those moments when we choose to learn from our losses and our experiences how to be better, how to choose peaceful responses. And it's all an uplifting life is all about making those peaceful choices. So I'm very excited about this book. It's going to come out in 2026, and I'll be telling you more. So anybody who wants to join my website, get on my mailing list or besteveryou.com, please do so. We'd love to keep you apprised of that book, and I will come back to this for that with that. But yes, peace is much uplifting life is all about living peacefully. Other questions? Let me see. What else was there?
Yeah. So Katie, Elizabeth Copeland is having trouble raising her hand. So we have two hands up, and then
Okay.
I will just ask if it's possible for you, Elizabeth, if your video isn't on, if you put it on, then I'll be able to find you and have you go after Denise and then Maribel. And Denise,
Oh, there
if
she
it's
is.
if it's possible for you to, yes, I thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, there's so many Elizabeths here. I'm losing track. Um, Thank you, Denise. I'm going to just do this and add you here to the spotlight so you can go ahead and ask your question or share what you'd like to. Thank you.
Katie, I really resonate with what you're speaking about because I have had to go through life facing challenges because I was born with cerebral palsy, and I'm now 63, and I beat a lot of people's odds and what they said about me. And my question to you is this: do you have any classes that someone could take um that would um entrench them in your experiences and what you offer to people?
What I do is I coach people, and I am putting together some curriculum now to help
Okay.
people. But if you're able to get the book and read the book, that will help, or get someone to read it to you.
Okay, I
Because
can get it.
yes, because that will help you understand. And Michaela's story is one that will really resonate with you.
And
Michaela was, and I encourage you to read her story because it's very much like yours.
yeah, and and I don't know if I can say this, but with all the stuff that is going on in the world with DEIA, diversity, equity, and inclusion, I was praying to God, let there be an outlet for me because I I've got a lot of skills, but I can't work because if I work it gets all screwed up. And so I am gonna follow you and all that kind of thing. And
Wonderful.
thank you so much.
And keep telling your story, and keep
Yeah.
telling
Oh,
your story and how you lifted yourself up and how
well,
you continue to do that.
it's on
Please.
Amazon, so it's out there for people to read. So thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you
Elizabeth
so much.
Copeland, do you have a question?
And then Maribel
Yes,
will come back to
yes.
you. One second,
Hi,
Elizabeth.
it's so great to see you, Katie,
You
and everybody
too.
here. Susan, haven't seen you in a while. I just want to personally, well, a couple of things. I want to personally recommend this book. It is fabulous. I'd loan you my copy, except I've written all in it and highlighted and yeah. But and I love Katie's way of getting to the story with people. I think that's fabulous, and I just would recommend that sometimes a different art form can get people out of that shell. Maybe they don't want to tell you, but maybe they'll draw a picture, or maybe they'll, do something else that's art related that's helpful. What I did want to ask Katie is if you will talk about your card deck,
Oh,
because
yes.
I just thought
Yes.
that was so great. And for people who are tactile, I think it's an excellent resource.
I wish I had one with me. I should have brought it down, but I didn't. Anyway, it's a card deck, and what it has is the prompts that are in the book at the end of each chapter are questions to prompt you to ask, what do I need? What do I want to learn? What's most important to me? And they're really questions like I talk about in one chapter about community. then the prompts at the end are, do I have a community? Do I have a community that is embracing who I am? Do I fit? A lot of us right now, when we talk about peace, we talk about how unsettled we feel, the losses, the loss of DEI, those kinds of losses are related to our values. What do we value? What is most important to us as a human being? No one can take that away from you. Your thoughts are your thoughts. How you live your life is your choice in terms of your values in your home. So sometimes you've got to do it in your own home, but do not ever let anyone take away your values in your mind. The wonderful book Viktor Frankl wrote, Man's Search for Meaning, is all about that. That in the midst of the worst possible hell, he found a way to maintain compassion. Do that. Do that now. Do it every day. Practice it. Live it. That's what that's how peace happens. If every one of us do that, those cards will help you. They will help you figure out what your triggers are, what your values are, what's most important to you that you want to practice every day. And the cards are available on my website, drkatieeastman.com. Thank you, Elisabeth.
Thank you so much, Elisabeth. And I look forward to having you at some point join us for one of these conversations, because your work also is just pretty remarkable. So thank you.
Thank
And
you. I'd be honored.
thank you. Maribel, let me just put you down here in the spotlight and feel free to go ahead. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
And
hi.
then Kai, your question, we'll come back to that.
Oh, hi. Thanks for the resources and the talk. For me, I've been doing
you. Go
grief
ahead.
support in Spanish for the
Oh.
last 6 years, and I continue to learn. But my question is, I mean, some of the strategy, some of the tools that I think seems beneficial are listening with compassion, of course, and not judgment. But sometimes I wonder what, if you can tell me from your experience, what will be also beneficial for clients. Some of my clients, you know, they have complicated grief, trauma, they are from low income communities, they sometimes don't have resources. And yeah, what will be, you talk about the spiritual muscles, but what will be like some of the tools that I could add to my toolkit?
You know, one of the things Elisabeth Kübler-Ross understood is we are more than just bodies. We are minds, we are spirits, we are emotions. And it is very real for people when they are experiencing a fearful loss. They're low income, they might be afraid they're losing their jobs, they might be in a sense of terror right now. I'm actually working with a fair number of people who are losing jobs right now, doing counseling. And one of the things I encourage them to do is to be angry, to express anger, to express rage, to express sadness, to express frustration, all of those emotions that Elisabeth named in the change guide, in the change curve. Because we have to let that energy out of our bodies or it makes us sick. And that was one of the things Kübler-Ross really recognized, is that we have to address all of us, not just the pretty parts. People need to learn how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And they need to learn to let their pain be their passion and their power. And when people are feeling the most disempowered, it's their power that comes from their resolve. But their resolve doesn't come if they don't allow the anger to fuel it. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Any of the, I'm sure, like a safe way to express anger or frustration or rage.
Yes, I go like this. When I used to work with oncology, and I had times when I lost several patients in one day, the grief would just build up in my body. And I would literally go down the hall going just like that. And I would blow out that energy, that angry energy. And I would just, and I would blow it out of my body as fast, as big and deep and hard as I could. And then I would say to myself, how do I want to remember this person who died? So I would consciously ask myself, what can I say that will allow me to let go of this person? So that's what I learned. I learned physical breathing techniques that allow you to do a deep dive into that anger, release it from your body, and deal with it through journaling, through music, through whatever outlet, through the arts, like Elisabeth said. But it needs to get out. It isn't healthy to internalize that anger. And a lot of people, especially people who are marginalized, do not give themselves permission to be angry.
Mhm.
And they need to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I advocate for that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I did a debrief in a school where students from there is a shooting or something. They were doing a debriefing on their grief, and the teachers were like, "Well, sit down and listen and don't wiggle," and like they want them to be like robots. And I told them, no, they need to move, they need to laugh, they need to wiggle, whatever they need to do, because they're in shock, right? And they
Right.
just they need to be allowed to do that. So through the body. So it makes sense.
Right.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for your question, Marbelle. And that moving that energy through in a physical way is just, I think, one of the most remarkable things that I've learned, like as an adult, is because it was just, there's energy that just gets so stuck at a cellular level. And then like the body just like has this sort of sense of keeping it down, sort of physically get up and move it. And to do that on some kind of daily basis can be a brilliant thing. Diane, I see your question, but first let me go to the question in the chat from Kai. And Kai's question, Katie, is how do you best support a spouse, kids also, that are having a difficult time accepting a terminal diagnosis? How do we maximize the time that is granted to us?
Well, thank you for that question. I have seen so many occasions where children are kept in the dark way too long. So the most important thing is honesty, to share with them what is going on. What they are most afraid of is far worse than what you tell them. They need to know what's going on so that they can enjoy as much time as they can with you and with your spouse. Now, that said, your spouse may not want to do that. That is a personal choice. Difficult, but I will share with you a story of a child whose mother refused to tell her that she was dying. And the child had stomach aches and just was horribly sick for weeks. And I kept encouraging, please tell her, please tell her, please tell her. When they finally did, 2 days before her mother died, she threw up. And she came to me and she said, I guess I just threw up my feelings. So the most important thing is, yes, the person who's dying has a right to hold their messages to themselves if they wish to, but recognize that if you don't talk about it, the elephant is there, the emotions are there, and people get sick. So find ways to enjoy life by being honest about none of us know how long we're going to live. We all need to live as if we're dying. That was Elisabeth Kübler-Ross's message. We all need to live every day as if it's our last. And what a great message and lesson for your children. So regardless of whether or not it's imminent, we all need to live like that.
I just want to share, there was a time where I was fortunate enough to be one of the co-facilitators for a group of young adults that all of them had life-threatening illness. And We would meet weekly to have conversations with them, and once a month, the parents would meet in the next room. And once a month, I would support a group of younger children from 4 to 12 that also had life-threatening illnesses. And those children were just remarkable teachers. I'll never forget a young boy who was 7, and he had a brain tumor. And his 4-year-old sister would come to the group sometimes with him. And he just said to us, you know, the thing is that's so great about our group here is that I can just say, I'm going to die from my brain tumor. I know that. But if I say that to my mom, she just starts crying and crying. And I feel so bad that I'm hurting her feelings. So having an outlet for him to just express what he knew to be true was amazing. And with other friends, they had young children. One was 13 at the time that one of their moms was dying, and the other was 2. And the mom who was the caregiver mom was a therapist. So she was very clear with her kids, and she would say to them, this is happening. Joanne is very sick. We don't know how long she'll be alive, but she'll probably die. And you two can spend as much time in there in the room or not. This is, you know, your choice, and I will support whatever you want to do. A year later, when we were together on the anniversary of Joanna's death, the 2-year-old was now 3 and verbal. And she told us, like, she knew everything that was happening. She just didn't have the words for it, but she was so happy that she could do it at her pace, and that there was not an expectation that there was a right or wrong way to do it. And the 13-year-old chose not to be in the room for most of the time in the last couple of weeks, and felt very empowered and understood, because it was constantly told to them of how much they were loved by both of their parents. And, you know, I have heard so much, like in working in hospice, and the social workers and the staff will come in and say, oh, the family wants to protect their children, so they're not telling them that grandma, mom, or dad, whoever, is dying. And I just, it would be very hard not to say, if you want to know what's happening in your family, ask your children, because they are sponges and they know everything that's happening in your family.
Absolutely, absolutely. They do know. They do know.
Yeah.
And we do them such a disservice when we think that they don't. So so other questions. I know there's stuff in the chat.
Diane has got a question here, so we'll bring her in next.
Okay.
Diane?
Thank you. I don't know how much of you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Perfectly.
Yeah, great. It's interesting. I got on this training on the recommendation of Mission Hospice, where I started to volunteer. Yep. And I also do healing touch and other things, but it's interesting because today what I'm experiencing is kind of my own experience of like enormous grief and frustration. This morning, I was supposed to have a surgery to open my airway. I have a breathing issue, a stenosis in my airway. And I learned yesterday that my HMO denied the authorization for the surgery yesterday. And it has just like thrown me into a rage for hours yesterday. I mean, I got on the phone with the managed care department and I basically said, F you. You know, you guys, how dare you, right? Do you have any idea? This is not patient-centered, right? And I mean, I struggle to breathe and talk, and I can't, walk and talk. Just now, it's a struggle. And I've just been going through like incredible grief, loss, frustration, anger, everything that was, in the chart that that you showed. And I'm really listening to what you're saying. And I'm like, and yesterday I was like, how much longer am I going to stay in this anger? Because it feels a little bit corrosive. It feels like it's not just about this event. It's about feeling powerless in the face of an insurance system that doesn't give a hoot about me. It's, it's the fear of losing my voice, my breath, my life, right? I'm not going to die of this tomorrow, but, if I don't get a surgery, like in the next several weeks, it really does impact my life in a big way. So, my HMO is like, well, we don't want you to go to UCSF. We want you to go here within our plan, blah, blah, blah. I've done that twice with them already, and so that's why I escalated it up. Anyway, the details don't matter. It's just I just appreciate what you were sharing, and I was listening to, I really believe in that, my peace of mind is coming when I align myself with my values. I very much live in that space. And what are my values? Obviously my own life, right? And equity and fairness and, health is a right for all. And so why am I being denied at the last minute? Um, anyhow, I'm allowing myself to be like furious, but I'm
Yeah.
for a while, right? And then looking at why is it hanging on for, as long as it is, like just checking in with myself, like what might this, relate to as an old wound, as you mentioned. But also, I'm like, this is going to sound totally crazy. One thing I can do, even with this airway situation, is I can go downhill skiing because the lift takes me to the top of the mountain. I don't have to climb. And then I ski down and I am so happy, right? So
Yeah.
tomorrow I'm going skiing and
Good.
fuck this whole situation. Right? Sorry for
Yeah.
my language. I'm just so angry. I just want to check in. I'm like, am I being self-destructive? Because I can go there. But anyway, I just felt like
Well,
this is just what I needed to hear today, and I appreciate all that you share. Your book sounds amazing. I'm gonna buy it, and thank you for offering this, and the timing's great.
well, and I want to say back to you is people come to me a lot and they say, how long does grief take?
Mm.
And I say the same thing. It takes as long as it takes. You're going to be as angry as long as you need to be angry. And then you're going to
Mhm.
use it as fuel and you're going to fly down that mountain tomorrow and you're going to find your spiritual muscles that are going to tell you something you can do to rectify this situation, or at least to try to the best of your ability so that you can walk away from it feeling that you did everything you could. And really, I love this phrase. I use it all the time. Show up, pay attention, tell the truth, and then let go of the outcome. We can do what we can. It's the old serenity prayer. And it's like, do what you can. Do what you can. And recognize what that is. And keep trying. Jason's favorite saying was never, 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 never give up. Always try. So yeah, I can imagine you skiing tomorrow. You're going to fly down that mountain.
And hopefully not break anything. But yeah, thank you so much. I love the reference to the Serenity Prayer. I say it every day,
Yep.
honestly. So yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane. Katie, there's a couple of questions here in the chat. One is, could you please speak about the word compassion?
Ah, yes. Compassion, my definition of compassion is there's light inside you, and there's light inside me. And I do everything I can to light you up. You do everything to light me up. So we are always thinking about our connection, and we are living compassionately when we are trying to light each other up in a metaphorical way. So I always want the best for you. You always want the best for me. That's a compassionate connection. As caregivers, many of you may be caregivers. When we are compassionate, we are trying to lift up those whom we care for to live their best life. To do that, however, we have to lift ourselves up. We put our oxygen mask on first and we self-care. So compassion is a choice we make to light and lift each other up.
Thank you so much, Katie. There's a couple of things in the chat, just reflections that people have put up that I'll share, and anything that you'd like to say. Barbara says, there's a quote I've read recently: "We need to live to the point of tears."
That's very powerful.
And Elisabeth shared that we aren't entitled to time. And then
right.
Catherine also shared, oops, I just lost this one. Catherine mentioned that there's often the phrase of like living our life as if it's our last day, and something that she's kind of reframed is the thought of living your life as if it's your first day.
Oh, I
And
love that. That's
it
cool.
resonates more she said, for me and many people, this resonates more, and just to consider offering both perspectives, which I think is beautiful.
I do too. And I think that fits with what Austin was saying. You knew,
Yeah.
but you grew up. Meaning when we're born, we have this intuition of how to live our lives compassionately, but we lose it along the way.
And she reflects a little bit later on some Pico Iyer books. And yeah, I just want to make sure that people aren't misunderstanding anything that's said. The reflection here is people often feel uncomfortable if we're not following the stages of grief, or if
Mm.
we do not feel what we are told we should share. So could you maybe talk about the stages of grief a little bit more?
Oh gosh. I'm
And
laughing because
yeah,
Elisabeth was so frustrated with
I
this.
know.
So
So frustrated.
frustrated. She was very clear that she never, ever, ever intended for people to think of the stages of grief as anything other than a beginning of a conversation that gave you a roadmap and tools. They were never intended to be linear. They were never intended to be absolute. Basically, the way you need to think about it is it started the conversation and it gives you guideposts. And I've had so many people come into therapy and say, I can't get from this phase to this. And I'm like, what? And it's not meant to be that. That's why when people use my cards, they use them by just throwing them out on the table and picking one up and saying, does that resonate with me? Am I at clarity, or am I at retreat, or where am I? Because that's what Elisabeth meant. They're just ideas for you to use as they're useful. They are not absolutes. There is absolutely no evidence, no scientific evidence, no evidence at all that she meant for them to be linear.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a conversation that I have probably once a week.
Oh, I have it every day. I have it every day. And Ken Ross sends me, would you please send this person an email? Would you
Yes.
send this person an email? I sent one last night. So yes, it is so misunderstood. And if she were sitting right here, which I have her picture, which is my favorite picture of her with ET, she would say that that has been the bane of her existence.
I heard her frustration with that. Oh, yeah.
Other questions or comments?
We do have, Catherine is saying, yeah, so Catherine has clarified what she was pointing to here. And that is 100% Elisabeth. Elisabeth's take on all of this is that there's not any way to feel about this. The way people feel about whatever is happening in the moment is the way to feel about it. And
Right.
if there's any confusion about that, that's never the intention here, is to direct people in one particular way to manage anything.
Right. Be authentic. Be real. Be real. Be authentic.
Yeah.
And feel what you need to feel. I always used to say to my clients, you have to feel to heal.
Thank you.
And there's another phrase that I created too that I'd like to pass on that I forgot to mention. Oftentimes when there's loss, you will hear the phrase, it was meant to be, or it happened for a reason. And what I flip that into is, well, maybe it didn't happen for a reason, but I'm going to use my reason to manage what happened.
That's dumb.
Diana, I see, Diana Frizzell, you're unmuted, and I'm wondering if you've done that because you have a question that you'd like to ask.
Oh,
No? Okay. anybody else here have anything that they
Or
might like?
comments? Anyone have
Com-
any comments? If not, I'm going to flip back to my slides for my last two, if that's okay.
Sure, and if somebody can't find their hand raising, if you unmute yourself and give me just a minute, I can see that here, and then we could just move forward like that. I know for some people, it's difficult to find the,
Okay, this is me, and I am on social media, different websites. But if you'd like the cards, you need to go to my website, which is drkatieeastman.com. But please follow me on any of these social media sites. I would love to hear from you at drkatie@drkatieeastman.com. I do consulting, I do coaching, counseling. I'm happy to help anyone navigate through any of these aspects of what I've talked about. If groups would like to purchase my book, I'll give it to you at a great discount. I love to go into organizations going through major change. My background is in hospice and palliative care, so I have been in the nonprofit world for many, 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 many years. So if anybody is struggling with change in your nonprofit especially, or your for-profit, I am there for that. Those are the ways to get in touch with me. And I want to make sure you know that. And in terms of getting the book, Amazon or Barnes & Noble are the two best places, as well as my website. Okay, I think that's it. Other thoughts, questions, comments? I can't see the chat. I'll leave that up for a minute if anybody wants to copy it.
yeah, and Katie, we're going to send this, you're going to send this to me, and I'm going to include
Yes.
it in the email that goes out to everybody with the link to this recording. And Wendy has asked, where are you located, Katie?
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to tell you all of this. I am in Washington State, where the mountains meet the sea, on the edge of I'm on Fidalgo Island in the San Juan Islands, right near Canada. So I'm north of Seattle.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katie.
And
Yeah, this is a wonderful conversation. And please, for everybody, just note you will be getting this information and a link as soon as Ken, who may or may not still be here, has an opportunity to put the link up on the YouTube channel for the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation. So we'll get all this information to you, and a couple of the other things that were mentioned here, including the card deck and the reference to Viktor Frankl, which is another book that can really support a lot of what talking about, and Elisabeth Copeland is suggesting that we send the link out for the book via bookshop.com, which supports local booksellers. So
good idea.
yes, card link. Okay. So anybody else, anything you'd like to say before leaving? And if not, then I can stay for just a couple of minutes. Katie, I'm not sure if that's something you can do, but sometimes there are folks that have questions that they are not comfortable asking when it's being recorded and such a large group. But I would just like to say before we leave to thank each and every one of you. If there are people here that are in a position, I always hate to end this way, but I realize that this is one of the reasons that people don't know about this. I would just suggest, if anybody is in a position to support the foundation, we are solely supported on donations. I don't believe there's any foundation money coming into this foundation at the time. So that's an opportunity and a way to keep these kinds of conversations available to as wide an audience as possible, which is always our goal. So I'm going to turn off the recording now, Katie. I just want to thank you so very much for your time today in this beautiful talk and leaving us with so many things to consider. And I'm going to turn the recording off, and then you and I can stay for just a couple more minutes. And thank you all so much on behalf of the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation.
Thank you all so much for coming. This has been such a joy. And I'm sure Elisabeth was dancing.
Definitely.
I'm going to turn this slide off here.